We heard in the news, in a major U-turn last night, Prime Minister announced a national statutory inquiry into how public authorities handle the rape gangs in northern cities and elsewhere. Comes in response to Baroness Casey's audit of the scandal. It seems that local authorities and police forces were reluctant to act, fearing that they would be accused of racism, since many of the accused, and indeed many of those who were eventually convicted, were men of Pakistani origin. The authorities preferred to blame and stigmatise the children who'd been their victims. What were the political pressures that made Labour so opposed to an inquiry? And what are the pressures that have proved stronger now and pushed them to reverse their decision? Joining me is the panel for today. Opinions and features editor at City AM, Alice Denby, former Conservative advisor Jennifer Powers, and former Labour aide Matthew Lazar. Welcome to you all. Matthew, let's start with you. I put it to you that the pressure that stopped Labour getting to this position before today was the fear that Muslim voters might desert Labour and go to sectarian candidates.
Look, I don't think it was as cynical as that. I think that the line that the government had, which is that there was this previous report that, into historic sexual abuse, it wasn't specifically on grooming gangs. It had these recommendations which hadn't been put in place before the election, etc. I think that was true. I think the big problem, the politics of this are really about how the government approaches issues rather than risking alienating the Muslim vote. Because I think what you're hearing in the Labour Party is, yes, Keir Starmer's a lawyer, so he commissioned a report from Baroness Casey. He's then, as we've heard, Downing Street's been saying he read every word. He's gone through it with his highlighter pen and he's now reached a conclusion. Fine if you're a lawyer, not great if you're a politician. And I think that's the issue, is that they may have got to the right place through a very sensible process, but politically they've been bleeding on this issue, frankly, for the 11 months since the election, when pressure's been mounting, and they've reached the conclusion that if they'd reached that 11 months ago, would have done them much less harm politically, and because they've decided it's the right thing to do, would have done the right thing earlier. So it's not, I think that's the real question that you hear from the Labour Party. Somebody said to me the other day, when's the Prime Minister going to discover how to do politics?
Alice, you've heard an explanation there of what were the pressures on the Labour Party. What do you think? What did you think of my proposition that actually it was the fear of the Muslim voters deserting to sectarian candidates?
Look, I do think you have a point there. There are seats like in Birmingham and Ilford North. There are big beasts of the Labour Party like Jonathan Athwash, who lost his seat to a Gaza independent candidate who mobilised a sectarian Muslim vote. People like Jess Phillips in Birmingham is vulnerable, Wes Streeting in Ilford South. So I think that is something that is playing on Keir Starmer's mind. But I do agree with Matthew more that I think what the greater political pressure that is exerted on Keir Starmer is this idea, is that of the faceless bureaucrats. I think whether it's, he's done this because Louise Casey has told him to. He wants to give away the Chagos Islands because the International Court of Justice told him to. He is more, I think, vulnerable to this idea of a kind of rules-based lawyerly order than he is to any sense of principle or indeed a sense of what's in Britain's best interests.
Jennifer, what do we make of it? Here is yet another U-turn. I began by saying, another week, another U-turn. And what about the political touch here, the sureness or lack of sureness of political touch? I mean, could not any sort of amateur political advisor have said we were going to end up here eventually?
Yes, I think a lot of us were saying that this was going to end up this way. So I agree with both my panelists. This is a triumph of proceduralism over political judgment or indeed principles. And I think that is one of the key challenges for this government, is a lack of values or strategy at the heart of the government. This all happened really quickly on the back of the Casey review being published. But I also think it was years and maybe a decade or more in the making. And I say that because we are now seeing the coming apart of this idea of multiculturalism. And that is this questioning of multi-ethnic society. Absolutely, we all welcome that. But in terms of a culture, what about shared values, shared norms? Shouldn't we be colorblind in terms of victims and in terms of perpetrators? Should we be more concerned about doing the right thing and showing justice to be done than community tension or supposed community tension? So I think there's a lot to unpack here with this decision.
Matthew, if Jennifer is right that we're arriving at a position at last where we're going to be colourblind in these matters, is it a good look that Labour has been dragged to that position kicking and screaming?
I don't think it is a good look, and I frankly think there were a lot of people on the centre-left of politics, including actually quite a lot of left-wing figures like a Labour MP throughout the noughties, Anne Cryer, who was who's on the far left of the party, was one of the first people to call out these issues. So I think it mustn't become, I think it must be taken away from being a left-right issue. People on the left have to say, we need to do whatever needs to be done, we need to say whatever needs to be said, whatever sensibilities are upset, and whichever nice concepts like multiculturalism and not upsetting people is done. So I think that's the thing. I think one of the issues is that there isn't the wider narrative this week. As you said, we've had another week, another U-turn. Arguably, we've had two because we had the winter fuel allowance, but they did announce it last weekend. They did it this week. And so what I think you're seeing is that what the people are saying is a lack of a story. So Rachel Reeves, she name-checked about 100 constituencies in her speech. Very nice in her spending review speech, but not quite sure what the story is. And on grooming gangs, what's the story? May have ended up in the right place, but the way they're getting it, as you say, too legalistic. The lack of a narrative is what I think that is killing the government, both with the public and therefore with Labour MPs as well.
Alice, a difficult sort of general question. The panel has emphasised proceduralism. Mm-hmm. How does it happen again and again that the government ends up on the wrong side, ends up, in this case, stigmatising victims and giving a free hand to perpetrators of rape? How do these things happen?
Well, I think Keir Starmer has ended up in this position because, as I say, I don't think he has a core sense of what he believes in and what he wants to do with the job of Prime Minister. I think he's there because he just thinks he'd be good at it, without a sense of how he wants the country to change. More broadly, I think I would say that I hope, as well as looking into the ethnic side of this grooming gang scandal, I think it should also be looking at how these girls were let down by the state. Many of these girls were in care. They're terribly, terribly let down by the British state. So I think that that's an issue we need to be looking at as well. I think more broadly, the reason why we have ended up in this position is because of a fear of being called racist. I think people didn't want to highlight that the perpetrators of these crimes were predominantly of Pakistani origin because they were scared of inflaming racial tensions and of being accused of being racist themselves.
Jennifer, my theory about why Reform UK is leaping ahead is it's not just migration. It's about a whole series of things where the British state seems to be on the wrong side of what the majority of public opinion believes. Yeah. And this is yet another example. Now, in this case, do you think Labour, with this U-turn, has done enough to escape from that?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. The question you asked to Alice, I would answer it this way. The theme that links all of these, or many of these issues, is a lack of accountability. Mm-hmm. We now have a state system which prioritizes process over outcome. And that is embedded in the job descriptions, the hierarchies, the hiring policies of the whole state. It has become ossified to the point where the point of the state is for the state to exist. And it's sort of everyone else be damned. And so we see that in particular instances. When I was in Downing Street, the blood contamination scandal was running on into its third decade. And I think there's been 5 prime ministers who've been overseeing that process. And I'm not sure that any of the victims have yet received compensation. We saw the post office scandal. We've seen the grooming gangs, which, as Matthew said, these were flagged 20 months ago. So this lack of accountability for officials, for politicians, is a real issue. And until and unless the government solves that, I'm afraid we're only going to see more of this.
Thank you very much, panel. I think you've taken us to profound places there. Now, I'd just stay there for a moment, if you would. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, travelled with the Prime Minister of Canada for the G7 summit. And I think it was on the aircraft that the Prime Minister made this statement about the change in policy on the grooming gangs. How did you react to that, Christopher?
Well, I couldn't believe it, Michael. It's actually my question. What happens in these trips is you fly over to the G7 with the Prime Minister, a very privileged position. You're on his plane, and we agree what to ask him. I thought I'd ask him about the grooming gangs. There's a leak on yesterday, saying that it should recommend a national inquiry. I said simply, would you agree with that and go with that if Louise Casey says we need a national inquiry. And he then did a long preamble and then said that she looked at the material, this Louise case. He says he's come to the view that there should be a national inquiry. I have read every single word of her report and I am going to accept her recommendation. And there we have it. He then said there'd be a statutory inquiry under the Inquiries Act, which gives the chair of the inquiry, whether it's a lawyer or whoever it is, or judge or whoever it might be, the power to compel people to give evidence to it. So yes, it's one of those moments, I think, in life, you're waiting for something which you think must be coming soon. Suddenly it happens and you're surprised. I did say back in January, as soon as they commissioned Louise Casey for this rapid audit, we were going towards a national inquiry. Your panel chat there is fascinating. I think what we're seeing with Keir Starmer, he is procedural, but when he gets the evidence, he acts on it. So for him, he wasn't going to shoot from the lip or the hip on anything. He wants to get the evidence which he's got there from Louise Casey. He's read that, he's acted, and that's how he's doing his government, whether you like it or not.
And more broadly now, the G7 are going to be meeting in Ottawa. Is it inevitable that the G7 is going to urge Israel to show restraint over Iran?
That is inevitable, and that's what's happening already. We've heard from Sir Keir Starmer again on the flight over to Canada last night. He said he's trying to de-escalate the fighting between Iran and Israel. He said the situation is fast moving to us, and there were discussions with allies at every level. He says that the deployment has already started of RAF Typhoons to the region. That is a contingency support across the region. The idea being there, although they won't say what it is, it looks like we're protecting UK assets in the Middle East, because if we do go towards supporting Israel at any point, and that happened in both April and October last year, if that would happen again, Iran says it could put our assets, or bases or whatever it might be in the Middle East into the possibility of being attacked by Iran. It is very, very tense. So the timing of this G7 meeting, which takes place tomorrow in Banff, we're flying this afternoon to there, is important. As of today, the PM is meeting with, again, formally this time, with the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney. They went to a bowling game. They watched in a pub a ice hockey game last night. I can tell you that the Edmonton Oilers lost 5-2 to the Florida Panthers. The Oilers are Mark Carney's team. But on the way over here, we did hear from Sir Keir Starmer. He made clear the importance of Canada, and he said this, Michael. He said that Canada is an independent, sovereign country and a much valued member of the Commonwealth. Now, that is an obvious thing to say. You and I have known about that. That is Canada's legal situation in the world. But they're saying it because of the activity of Donald Trump. He wants to make this place America's 51st state, and therefore the UK is standing by Canada against Trump.
Yes, and the head of state is His Majesty the King. Thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope.